I never thought buying a peaceful piece of land in the countryside would lead to this kind of drama. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet life on my own ranch, far from the noise of the city and the hassle of rules. But that peace didn't last long. Just a few weeks after moving in, I had a surprise visit from a man I'd never seen before. He pulled up in a dusty pickup truck, wearing a stern face and a belt full of attitude. Turns out he was the HOA president. Yeah, you heard that right. There's a homeowners association way out here, and according to him, I had to join. At first, I thought it was a joke. I mean, how could someone just show up and tell me I'm breaking some rule I never agreed to? But the guy wasn't joking. He got angry fast, claiming I was disrupting the community and refusing to follow the covenant. The tension escalated real quick, and then to my disbelief, he reached behind his seat and pulled out a shotgun. No shots were fired. The message was loud and clear. I stood there, heart racing, not sure what to say. Was I really being forced into an HOA at gunpoint, or was there something more going on here? I backed up slowly, hands visible, trying to stay calm. Look, man, I just bought this place. No one mentioned anything about an HOA, I said, my voice steady but my nerves shot. He didn't budge. Said the land I bought was part of a private community, and by living here, I was automatically under their rules. Only problem, that was never in the paperwork. No disclosure, no agreement, nothing in the title documents. I checked them twice. The guy introduced himself as Carl, said he'd been president of the HOA for over a decade, and that outsiders who don't respect the order weren't welcome. I asked him for proof, documents, maps, anything that showed I was legally bound to his little group. He got defensive, muttered something about handshake deals and old arrangements. None of it made sense. I started wondering if this was even a real HOA or just some power trip he'd been on for years. Neighbors started acting weird too. A few waved from a distance, but didn't come over. Others avoided eye contact completely. It was like they were scared. Or worse, used to this kind of thing. I felt like I had stepped into some twisted little world where one man's word ruled everything. But I wasn't ready to back down just yet. Something was definitely off. The next few days were tense. I tried to go about my business, fixing up the barn, clearing some brush. But I could feel eyes on me. Every time I stepped outside, someone was watching from a distance. Carl's truck passed by more than once, always slow, always staring. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything just in case. I even called the county office to dig into public records. And guess what? The asterisk was asterisk an HOA, but it had been inactive for years. No board, no official dues, no legal enforcement, nothing that matched Carl's story. That's when I started to realize this wasn't about rules. This was personal, or maybe territorial. Carl saw himself as the gatekeeper of this land, and to him I was a threat. But why? I hadn't broken any laws. I wasn't tearing up roads or blasting music. I was just living. One neighbor, an older guy named Frank, finally stopped by one morning. He didn't say much, but what he did say hit hard. Carl doesn't like people he didn't invite, he muttered. And most folks just do what he says to keep the peace. I asked if anyone had ever pushed back. Frank looked away and said, "They don't live here anymore." There's something deeper going on, and whatever it is, it's not just about some HOA paperwork. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me sit up and check the window. I started locking everything, gate, barn, even the shed. I wasn't scared exactly, but something in my gut told me things were coming to a head. The next morning, I found deep tire tracks on my property, fresh. Someone had driven up near the back fence and turned around fast. Nothing was taken, but it felt like a warning. Or maybe a test to see if I was paying attention. I called the sheriff's office, trying to keep it casual, just asking questions about property rights and HOA enforcement out here. The deputy I talked to sounded unsure but said, Unless there was something in writing or a court order, no one could force me into anything. He offered to drive by if I felt threatened. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Later that afternoon, Carl showed up again. No shotgun this time, but the look in his eyes was colder than before. He stood at the edge of my drive and said, "You've had your warning. Either you sign or we escalate." I asked what that meant. He just smiled and walked off. Then that night, the power went out. Not the whole area, just my place. And when I stepped outside to check the breaker, I noticed something nailed to my gate. A copy of the HOA agreement and a dead crow hanging beside it. I stared at that gate for a long time. The dead crow swung slightly in the breeze, its wings stiff and dark. The HOA agreement was torn at the edges, like it had been crumpled and straightened out again. Someone wanted me rattled, and I'll be honest, it was working. I took the paper down with gloves, tossed the bird in a bag, and tried to tell myself it was just intimidation. But who does that? This wasn't about neighborhood rules anymore. This was about control, territory, fear. The next day, I drove into town and spoke to a local attorney. I showed him everything: photos, the so-called agreement, the county records. He raised an eyebrow and said, "This HOA has no legal standing. You don't owe them anything." I felt a bit of relief, until he asked if I knew who Carl really was. Turns out, Carl wasn't even the legal owner of his property. It was still in his late father's name, and his father, one of the original founders of a failed land cooperative out here, an old unregistered group that tried to become an HOA years ago, but never filed anything official. So Carl had no real power, but that also meant he had nothing to lose. And when I got home, the gate was open, my barn door was swinging, and deep inside I heard footsteps. I wasn't alone. I stood frozen at the edge of the barn, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. This was my land, my home, and I wasn't going to be chased off. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a rusted crowbar leaning against the porch, and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and silence, except for the creak of old wood and the soft shuffle of boots deeper in the dark. "Carl," I called out. Nothing, just more silence. I moved slowly through the shadows, heart pounding, until I reached the back stall, and there he was, Carl, standing with a lantern in one hand, going through a box of old paperwork I hadn't even touched yet. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked tired. "You weren't supposed to find this place," he said quietly. "This was our history, our claim, and now you are just tearing it apart." I didn't understand until he held up an old deed, not for my land, but for all the surrounding lots. Land his father once tried to turn into a private commune, long before it ever went on the market. That was the real reason Carl wanted control, because he believed he was taking back what was stolen. I told him it was over, that he had no legal ground. He didn't fight. He just walked out, shoulders slumped. But here's the twist. 2 days later, I got a call from the county. The survey markers on my property line were off by nearly 200 feet, part of my ranch. It was never for sale. Technically, I'm the one trespassing. I stood there staring at the flagged stakes the county crew had placed. Carl was right, at least partly. A portion of the land I thought I'd bought wasn't mine. It had never been included in the sale. It explained why Carl was so aggressive. Still, the way he went about it, intimidation, threats, all that HOA nonsense, was completely out of line. In the end, the county helped sort it out. I kept most of the ranch, but the disputed area, where the barn sat, had to be renegotiated. Carl didn't show up for the meetings. Turns out he left town a day after our last run-in. No forwarding address, nothing. Just gone. I moved the barn, re-fenced the property, and tried to get back to normal life. The neighbors eventually warmed up. One even brought over a pie, said things felt calmer now. I never got a clear answer about the dead crow or the cut power, But part of me thinks Carl wasn't acting alone. Maybe some secrets in that old cooperative still linger. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: always check the fine print, and never underestimate how far someone will go when they think they're protecting something that once belonged to them.